So we have Facebook Live going and we are recording. So I think we might as well get started. Good evening to those of you who are joining us tonight for this presentation on self-compassion. This is part of the mindfulness challenge that the Dwight Foster Public Library and a variety of public libraries in Jefferson County have put together for our library users. And we hope that, well, I'm glad you're able to come because the weather's terrible and I don't know that you would come out for a program if it wasn't virtual. So thanks for doing this with us virtually. So with us this evening is Sheila Kozler. She works in private practice. She's a licensed clinical psychologist here in Fort Atkinson. She's lived in a variety of Midwestern states, including Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, and Michigan, but not the evil Illinois. And she's lived here in Wisconsin for 16 years. She likes the 4 seasons and learning how to cross-country ski. Have you been out in any of this cold weather, Sheila?
I have. Mm-hmm.
The snow is so wonderful, isn't it?
I still think I'm really cross-country falling, but I am learning how to get up.
I've been cross-country skiing for about 40 years now, and I went out on Saturday with my husband, and about halfway down the trail, we were just standing there for some reason, and boop, there I was on the ground. So don't worry about the falling down thing. That just is part of it.
Mm-hmm.
When the pandemic isn't raging, Sheila does enjoy going to supper clubs and small town communing. And she really does love the beauty of Wisconsin and being outside as much as possible, which has been a blessing for all of us this year. She has a husband and 3 children and 2 dogs as well. So we're going to get started. Sheila has a slide presentation. If you're not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat option. If you have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. And we will have time at the end of the presentation for talking about some questions. But if you have a question as Sheila's going along, just do that. I will be monitoring that for her and trying to make sure that we get to your questions. So without further ado, Sheila, thank you.
Right. Great. Yes, you're welcome. So hello, mindful community. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. And I cannot see you, but I know that you're out there. So I hope that you have found a cozy spot to settle into for an hour of dedicated mind-body care. It is a true pleasure for me to introduce the what is and the beginning how-tos of self-compassion. And as it's subtitled, Moments and Minutes to Greater Peace and Presence. And so peace and presence may seem like a lofty ideal or a faraway destination these days. But my goal in our time together this evening is to show you that the capacity and the skill set for self-compassion travels with us always, and life is going to give us multiple daily opportunities for practice. So the other thing I want to do is dispel any fears that self-compassion is selfish. You know, it starts with self, and so sometimes people think, oh, if something starts with self, it's self-indulgent or selfish. But actually the opposite is true. The research on self-compassion is very clear that although the practice of self-compassion is directed inward, the foundations of warmth and inclusion first affect the qualitative experience of one's being, and from that place of change and centeredness, those effects ripple out to your closest loved ones and then the community. So tonight we're going to be talking about and learning some beginning how-tos of a practice that has really unimaginable scale. So thank you, Dwight Foster Public Library in Fort Healthcare. In particular, thank you, Amy, for helping me with the chat questions. And I will take a couple of breaks to take questions as we go. There's a lot of content, and so I just want to break it up a bit. I have heard too that there might be some people that are joining us from out of state. So it'd be nice if, I won't see it, but if you could share and introduce yourselves to one another by simply putting the city that you're joining us from or the town, or if you're out of state, if you put the state in the chat box. So I'm actually going to start with a question for all of you. I'd like for you to think about who was your favorite teacher when you were a child. And if that seems too far from your memory, then if you can think about a mentor or a leader or a coach. So it's extremely likely that the person you're thinking of excelled in cultivating and sustaining relationship. They had a skill set, but beyond that, they invested, they shared their knowledge, and they didn't give up, and they let you know that they cared about you. This type of emotional imprinting is felt, it's embodied, and it provided the context in which their teachings could be taken in, remembered, and applied in your own life. So much so that when you're randomly asked in February of 21, they pop up in your mind. They're there with you in spirit. In other words, the relationship between you and that person impacted your life in a positive, you-affirming way. As a culture, as humans, we welcome and we value these types of relationships. So why does this matter on a presentation on self-compassion? It matters because relationship is at the heart of self-compassion work. In self-compassion, we flip who we are building a relationship with. And instead of growing emotional connectivity with someone outside of us, it's the person within us that becomes tended to. Now, we all have social brains, so we're wired to receive and to invest in relationship. And that includes the relationship that we have with ourselves. The attention and the effort that we apply in working with our own mind and body provides immediate reinforcement. And I think it's sometimes helpful to remember that the mind is an eager student searching for a benevolent teacher. I also think it's interesting that we humans have we've long valued benevolent relationships between others, but are only recently beginning to see a cultural shift, a permission, so to speak, on cultivating a healthy, loving relationship with oneself. So, self-compassion may be a brand new concept for you, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One study showed that it takes 17 years from the onset of research to reach mainstream consciousness. So in a trickling of self-compassion work started in the early 2000s, and we are now beginning to see science informing curriculum in therapy and in our schools, and now even at the public library. So self-compassion is part of the growing mindfulness movement, in which there are hundreds of practices to help us pay attention in a particular way. Now these resources are as close to us as a Google search or using our smartphones to get mindfulness applications. So the technology makes available the science and the tools, and science and tools work with something else that we all have housed within. So what is that? That is our incredible brains. Our brains are rich with cognitive and emotional resources. And I want to share just a few useful discoveries about the brain that shape our current understanding about this powerhouse, so that you feel confident that you have the right stuff on board for learning how to have a more loving and kind relationship with yourself. So first of all, the brain has a built-in natural capacity for transformation. Scientists used to think the brain stopped growing once we reached adulthood. But we now know that the brain generates 5,000 to 10,000 brain cells every day. So the brain is built to be an eager student and a lifelong learner. And it is strongly influenced by our external experiences, what our senses take in, and what happens in our day-to-day experiences. It is also, importantly, strongly influenced by our internal experience, where we choose to focus and how we show up for ourselves, and to what degree we consciously activate our cognitive and emotional resources. Secondly, we are born with the potential for higher level capacities like awareness and compassion, gratitude and kindness. But in order to grow in these skills, we have to be raised or existing in an environment that values and nurtures them. Now we know not all environments are equal or supportive. So if the external environment, such as family, work, the larger societal norms, do not value or support a quality that we wish to grow, we still have the internal environment in which we can focus. We ourselves can be caretenders of an emotionally supportive environment. Well, how do we do that? We start with our ability for paying attention in a particular way. We all have an ongoing internal narrative that comments on our lives as we live them. Sometimes we call that monkey mind, brain chatter, and most of the time that monkey mind or brain chatter chatters away privately. Once in a while, we'll verbalize it. So start with the intention or the goal to pay attention to how you explain the events of your life and what that chatter gives you as automatic thoughts. This attention or awareness combined with curiosity and openness to what is can be chosen and trained, and it's your brain's freedom fighter. And you join the cause when you choose to practice. So there are now hundreds of scientific studies that show us that practice wires and rewires our brain. There's a saying that goes, what fires together, wires together, meaning that what you focus on and what you work at becomes more strongly connected within the brain and becomes well-learned and performed with more ease. So if we want to become good at something, we practice. Now we understand this when it comes to something external like playing a sport or playing an instrument, but this also applies for internal practices. So it's also important to remember that practice does not make perfect. Practice makes better. So rather than just being subject and influenced by things that we can't control in our life, we can help our brains become better at going where we want it to go. We can be active participants in shaping our life experience. So I said there's hundreds of practices of mindfulness, but we're going to pay attention. Tonight's topic is on self-compassion. So we're going to hone in on that. So I'd like for you to think of self-compassion as a superfood. So what we want to do is include it in our daily diet for the exceptional benefits that it has. And so we're going to watch now a 2-minute video of Christine Neff. She is a national and international leader and researcher on the subject of self-compassion. She's going to briefly speak on the benefits of self-compassion and then importantly, the distinction between self-compassion and self-esteem.
Ashamed of you.
Gotta get it set up here. Here we go.
The last few years especially have seen a sharp uptick in the number of research studies conducted on self-compassion. And the bottom line is unequivocally, self-compassion is very strongly related to mental well-being. It's strongly related to less depression, less anxiety, less stress, less perfectionism. It's equally strongly related to positive states like happiness, like life satisfaction. It's linked to greater motivation, taking greater self-responsibility, making healthier lifestyle choices. It's also linked to having more sense of connectedness with others, better interpersonal relationships. We've also done some research comparing directly self-esteem and self-compassion. And what we find, what you can say is that self-compassion offers the benefits of self-esteem without the pitfalls. So it's associated with strong mental health, but it's not associated with narcissism or constant social comparison or ego defensive aggression. It also provides a much more stable sense of self-worth than self-esteem does, because it's there for you precisely when you fail. Just when self-esteem deserts you, self-compassion steps in and gives you a sense of being valuable, not because you've reached some standard or you've judged yourself positively, but because you are a human being worthy of love in that moment.
Okay. That's Christine F. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive then into what compassion means and what self-compassion means. So compassion, the word compassion, you have calm, which means with, and passion, which means to suffer. So compassion is the capacity to be present with another person in their suffering and to be moved to relieve their suffering in some way. So it is the I feel you of empathy, but it one steps past it, and it is also the motivation to apply effort for relief. So neuroscientists have begun to map the biological basis of compassion, and they're suggesting that it has an important evolutionary purpose. When we feel compassion, our heart rate slows down, and we secrete the bonding hormone oxytocin and the pleasure and motivation neurotransmitter dopamine. Regions of our brain linked to empathy, caregiving, and feelings of pleasure are activated. And in some practices of compassion, the area of the brain that's associated with negative emotion is dampened down. So friends, that is a buy one, get one free activity, which often results in the action of approaching others and caretaking. So essentially, what compassion helps us do is recognize that I am seeing another human being, and that human being is suffering or struggling. And when human beings are struggling, they need help. And how can I help? So I want you to, we're going to pause for a moment, and I want you to imagine like an imaginary scale where it's 1 to 10. And 10 is, when I think about compassion, that is very easy for me. I would say that that's a defining characteristic of who I am. And when I feel compassionate, it makes me want to do it even more. And then go all the way down to the number 1. That would be compassion is a hard concept for me to understand. And maybe I understand it, but it's very difficult for me to perform or want to do. So think about it in terms of where you think you fall on that scale, and give yourself a number and either write it down or try to remember it, because we'll come back to it. Okay, so self-compassion. Self-compassion is what we just described, compassion, but it is turned inward. So it consists of 3 main parts that are vital antidotes for the common harsh habits that we tend to often reserve for ourselves and employ when we're experiencing emotional pain and struggle. So what are these common habits? The first is that when we are struggling, we have a tendency to turn against ourselves with self-criticism. The second is that when we're struggling, we tend to turn away from our feelings of connection with other people and feeling that we are unique in the pain or an exception to kind of the human rule. And thirdly, this turning against ourselves and turning away from others is often what walks us to the cliff of over-identifying with the feelings of the pain of whatever we're enduring. So when we're there, it's difficult to think about anything else other than the pain of it. So, this is what we call secondary struggle. So you have the primary difficulty, which is the event in which you're feeling about in the first place. And then the way in which we treat ourselves in response to that pain adds layers of struggle to it. And that is called kind of the secondary suffering of the event. So it's no wonder that we can find ourselves easily in fight or flight when we're reacting to this and it feels overwhelming. So this is where self-compassion steps in. It empowers and it settles our nervous system with 3 psychological antidotes. The first one is self-kindness as a substitute for that critical self-judgment. And self-kindness is not just words. Self-kindness is a stance that you take towards yourself. It's similar to how you would show up and listen attentively to a good friend. So it involves being warm and understanding. It involves listening attentively, not interrupting or distracting. And it involves allowing everything in, allowing all the feelings in, giving ourselves permission to feel anything that comes up. All of those things allow for a softer, safer space for the truths of our lives to be tended to with love. The second antidote is remembering our common humanity as an antidote for thinking of self as exception. So when we are hurting, we can often feel alone, or our pain might feel very unique to us. Our common humanity reminds us of what we share, that we share a human life that is subject to vulnerability, imperfection, and struggle. It reminds us that it's not just me, this is the we of a human life. So that's not to say that the particulars of our struggles are shared. Those are unique. Those are different, and our timetable is not going to be the same as our neighbors. And we also know that struggle and suffering is not equitable. Yet, understanding that we're part of something larger offers a more graceful cushion and permission to open up to self and others in our pain, instead of allowing the primal instincts to isolate and to soothe through numbing, or to get defensive or to fight. So what we have is this spectacular evolved brain that can override the harsh habits with practice. So we enter the third antidote, which is mindfulness. So mindfulness is self-regulation of attention with an attitude of curiosity, openness, and acceptance. And out of the mindfulness practices, which really there are hundreds of mindfulness practices, here comes an increased steadiness, or presence and peace, creating a more balanced response when negative emotions rise, so that those negative emotions are neither stuffed down or exaggerated. So right here between your eyebrows, underneath your skull, you have your prefrontal cortex. And this allows for us, this is the most evolved part of the human brain, and it allows us the ability that is sometimes referred to as mind sight. And what mind sight allows is that ability for ourselves to follow our own thinking and our feelings, to follow our internal process. So we can think about our feelings, we can feel about our feelings, we can feel about our thoughts, and we can be an observer of how we are in a situation. So we begin to pay attention and work with our observing self. And when we do that, we create an emotional space between ourselves as observer and ourselves having an experience. And what that does is that emotional space takes the lid off the pressure cooker, allowing more choice in our responding. So on a piece of paper in your mind again, call up that scale again, that 1 to 10 scale. And this time we're talking about self-compassion, with 10 being, yes, self-compassion is something I'm skilled at. I understand it. It comes very easily for me. I'm consistent in it. And 1 being, nope, it's hard for me to understand. It's very difficult for me to practice. And just kind of think about where you would place yourself on that scale. And now compare the score between your self-compassion and your compassion for others. So if you're experiencing that there's a gap between those scores, you are not alone. Many people are surprised to find that people who are very compassionate towards other people oftentimes struggle with their ability to be compassionate towards themselves. So I want to just put on the slides, and the slides will be available for people to look at after the presentation to refer back to. We're not going to have time to get in detail into the obstacles for self-compassion, but I wanted you to have them so that if you find this is a lot easier in theory than practice, that you can come back and be like, oh yeah, maybe this is why. So there are very valid obstacles for the practice of self-compassion. So when we know the obstacles, we can better move around them. So Amy, if anybody has posed a question, I thought maybe this might be a good time before we get into the practices of self-compassion.
No particular questions yet. Does anybody have a question that you want to ask of Sheila right now? Oh, we've got a great job, Sheila.
Oh, thank you. Who's my friend out there?
That would, yeah, are you seeing who that's coming from?
I can't see.
Okay, yeah. And here's another under the Q&A. I do not have a question, but I would love to say that this is amazing. So,
Oh, thank you. Look at those compassion skills in action there.
there you go.
I feel the love. Thank you all. Okay, well, I'll ask again as we go further. There might be more questions when we get to the skills. So please don't be shy. And I'm sorry about the beep there. Okay, we're gonna move on. Okay, so tending to the relationship with ourselves, minutes and moments matter. So how do we tend to the relationship with ourselves? Contrary to some of our traditions like New Year's Eve, that annual heave-ho effort, that's not really how change happens. Change and tending to ourselves occurs in the micro moments that life continuously offers us. It's these small moments that are repeated every single day, where we pause and apply something different to the moment. Maybe it's just a stopping in our tracks for a bit. It can be a reconsideration, using different word choices, or choosing one of the many mindfulness practices to start experimenting with. So minutes and moments matter. If you do the larger practices of self-care and mindfulness, that is wonderful too, but I sometimes feel like people feel like they have to give a lot of, devote a lot of time to get an effect. And really, you don't. It's the frequency. It's the dedication to the practice on the everyday. So the other thing that matters, and what we're really going to focus in on the second part of this presentation, is words. Words matter. So you may recognize these words from the Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman, who burst into our into our awareness at the presidential inauguration. For those of you, if you didn't see it, I did include it in the resources because it's amazing. And so 6 minutes, Amanda Gorman spoke to a nation and a world about what's ours to own, what is shared, and what is possible in her poem, The Hill That Lies Before Us. So tonight I'm borrowing Ms. Gorman's inspirational words in the service of beginning a self-compassion practice, as she reminds us that words matter, and there is always light when we direct courage to the cause. So the cause that I am speaking on tonight is exactly how do we speak to ourselves in the moment that we are on the struggle bus. So as a starting point, we need to examine the brain chatter in our monkey mind to determine the feel and the impact of the words that we use when we are speaking of ourselves, to ourselves. Are these words friend or foe? Are they critic or are they caretaker? So the legal definition of verbal abuse is the use of words to cause harm to the person being spoken to. To think about that for a second. The use of words to cause harm to the person being spoken to. So what do we call words that cause harm inward? That is self-criticism. So that self-critical voice within that puts down, name calls, fault finds, shames, and otherwise negatively evaluates is no less than verbal abuse. So in the privacy of our own minds, there are no other witnesses to the personal attack. There's no upstanders to step in and to help us get help or reality check, give us a different perspective. And furthermore, our self-criticism is not usually tentative. It's not usually like, maybe I'm a loser. It's more like, you're a loser or worse, right? So self-criticism can occur in episodic bursts or become kind of the autopilot, the background noise of that brain chatter. It can be the default setting that explains life and the struggles that we have in life. So that steady undercurrent of thought process, under the surface, unquestioned, and believed as absolute truth with no fact checker, is dangerous to our psychological and our physical well-being. So the good news is, if you're like, yeah, I'm there, we're gonna, you remember the things I said about our incredible brains, and we're gonna start soon with some ideas for you to start to address this. Now first, I wanted to throw this picture of this coach up here and ask you what you think he might be saying. So I was an athlete in the 80s, and so my coach from the 80s, granted that was many years ago, he would have been saying something to us like, if you're smiling, you are not concentrating, or you're not taking the game seriously enough. Or the infamous no pain, no gain. Okay. And sometimes worse. Okay. So this coach on the screen and my coach, he hadn't gotten the message that the emotional research shows that angry criticism leads to more mistakes, because the person being criticized is now in a state of anxiety and focusing on what they're doing wrong. They actually make more mistakes. Yet, I have to go a little easy on this coach, because if we take a broader look at our American values and we think of some of the statements that we have carried over through generations, you'll see that there is a very pervasive attitude of dismissing and disapproving emotions that get in the way of being kind to ourselves. So I'm going to say a couple of them, but this would be a great time in the chat. I won't see it, but if you think of some things, please share with one another some of those commonly heard American values that aren't so keen on us being easier, not easy, but kind to ourselves. So a couple that I know are pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can sleep when you're dead. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. Okay, so I'll let you throw some out. And maybe we don't hear those exact phrases from people as much anymore. We are evolving as a culture, but we might feel that these messages still echo in that brain chatter because we might have heard them as a child, and they're still kind of show up. Okay.
We have two votes for put on your big girl panties. Two of us put that in there.
Okay.
Stay strong. Don't be a pansy.
Yes. Oh gosh, we could have like lots of conversation too at a different time, but still, especially or not especially, but how messages also get that they change depending on our gender. Oh, did we get another one?
We have a comment of such great observation. Learning to change and grow from states of anxiety causes much backtracking later in life. I noticed this type of criticism from my children's teachers.
Yes. Yes, so that to the point that even though I just said, we are evolving as a culture, but a lot of this tends to cycle. It continues to cycle. So, this is why I get excited about the research, because I think as a culture, we do pay a little bit more attention to the science and the research behind it. So when that continues to roll out, we can all be upstanders and take that research to the source of which we feel like maybe they need to get the message and consider a different way of approaching trying to work and grow and produce change.
And so we've got one more, don't be a sissy.
Yep. Yes. Right. How many times are boys told not to be girls? Right. That's such an insult, I have to say.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's flip that question though for a moment and let me ask, do we have any valued cultural messages that encourage us to take care of ourselves, to go, to be kind to ourselves? I was listening to Robin Roberts and I heard her say her message is to make your mess the message. Just be you. Sometimes I hear like, you be you, just be you. Does anybody have any others? No, those are a little harder to come by.
I'm reminded of the affirmations things that go around, you're strong, you're beautiful, and you can do this, or you are loved, or those daily affirmations kinds of things that I think you see a lot of.
Yes, we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. So I'll get there very shortly and address some of the affirmations that can sometimes be harmful.
We had a be beautiful and another Christopher Robin quote. Not quite sure, although poo is filled with wisdom. So.
Okay. I'll move on here. So my point about self-talk, it's the umbrella for the other 7 practices I'm going to talk to you about tonight, because it's about tending to self-talk. this is kind of the point where you can, when you are paying attention to your self-talk, where you can turn some of this theory into action. So I'm going to cover RAIN, yes and, values, hallmark moments, love echoes, self-compassion break, and loving kindness. And I am paying attention to the time. I know there's just 20 minutes left. So some of these are brief, so don't worry. Okay, but let's do RAIN. Let's start with RAIN. So if you've ever taken yoga before, you might have heard a yoga instructor say to you, the hardest part of yoga is showing up to the mat. And I would say that the corollary to that with self-compassion work is the hardest part of self-compassion work is pausing in your moment of struggle. I think that the pause, if you can pause, if you can slow down the rush of feelings and thoughts and demands that are occurring in the moment that you're on that struggle bus, you are 3/4 of the way there. And so Tara Brach is a mindfulness teacher, and she came up with the acronym RAIN, and the letters stand for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. So I'm just going to walk through this for a moment. Tara Brach is big on using self-touch to help us focus the brain on that reset, that pause. So you can, if I invite you to follow along with me if you'd like to. And I like, my favorite place to do this is my heart, but some people do like a hug. I don't know if you can see me, but I'm hugging myself. And then some people put their hands on their face. Okay, so I like to put my hands on my heart, and I like to put a little bit of pressure. I'm not hurting myself, but putting a little pressure on my heart. And the reason I like that is I can feel the warmth of my hands, and I can feel the inhale of my breath. I can feel my chest rise, and when I exhale, I can feel my chest lower. And right away, that's a signal to my brain that I'm doing something different. So when we're on that struggle bus, if we can remember, the first thing is just to pause, to do something different, to actually sit down for a moment, if we can, to use self-touch to help us remind, okay, we're going to do something different. We're going to recognize really that we're in that place. And then the second part of it is to allow. And what allow means is that we're going to allow all of the feelings and thoughts that we have to the table. Okay, or let it in. Okay, so we don't want to avoid certain feelings and thoughts, and we don't want to over-identify with just one or two. So we're really just saying, come on in. Then with what shows up, we want to have that curious mind where we can investigate. We can ask ourselves questions like, gosh, I can stay curious. Like, I wonder what that's about. Like, why in this moment was I feeling this? Or, and all of a sudden I'm having a memory, or my mind is racing to, 2 weeks from now about something that I'm just kind of creating in my imagination. I'm really curious about that. And two important questions in the investigate is, how am I showing up for myself in this struggle? How am I showing up for myself? Am I neglecting myself? Am I being that critic? Am I abandoning myself, or can I stay with me? And the second question is, what do I need? What do I need in this moment? And that leads us to nurture. So Tara Brach reminds us that RAIN and self-compassion in general is not a DIY project. You do not have to do it all yourself. I mean, you can, like some of the nurturing might be, well, maybe I need to address myself differently. Maybe I can change the words that I use for myself. Or maybe I need a hot bath because my body is so agitated, and my body needs to be reminded that it's safe. Maybe I need a hug. A 13-second hug can do wonders for that oxytocin system. So it's 4 steps, okay? And it allows us to do those 4 steps that we talked about before, like I'm a human, I'm suffering, I'm on that struggle bus. And I know that, as a human, when I'm in that place, I need help. And how can I help? How can I show up for myself? Okay, number 2, yes, and. So it's important to distinguish self-compassion from what can be good intentions gone sideways. And that is where sometimes those affirmations can step in. So empty boosterism or toxic positivity, which is intended to motivate and support and encourage, often falls short of truthfulness. It often is a denier of reality or a shamer of what is for someone's personal truth. So the words that we choose when we are offering statements to ourselves must be truthful. They have to be truthful. So if I'm saying something to myself or to someone else, like, you can do anything, that's not true. It's just not true. Like, I can't be a professional basketball player. I can't grow 5 more inches. Or, sometimes we'll say, you've got this. Well, what if we don't have it? What if being told you've got this or you're so strong means that puts more pressure on us to find something that we don't have or don't feel? So when we use words for ourselves, when we're changing a critic to a caretaker, we want to make sure that whatever words that we're using, we believe that they are true. It's helpful to remember in this situation, this yes and kind of tip, okay? And it's helpful to remember, I'm going to say a little bit more about yes and, but it's also helpful to remember that emotions are data and also a messenger to you. So we want to allow the colorful truth of our lives, all of it in, by pairing with the and conjunction. And I know some of you are my age or around my age, so you'll remember the Schoolhouse Rock Conjunction Junction song. It's probably playing in your head right now. So conjunction junction, what's your function? In this case, it's hooking up the truth of your human experience with acknowledging yes and. So yes and is an acknowledgement and an acceptance that all of our emotions are valid and have something to convey. Again, both data and messenger. So using the words yes and allows us more emotional agility. It allows self-compassion a chance to settle in. And here are some examples. I feel this, and this is also true. Or even though I feel, fill in the blank, I'm also a human deserving of love, if you believe that, okay? I may survive this, and it may change me in ways I would never wish. Or, this is one for the COVID times, for those people who have gotten vaccinations, but also know there's other people that need vaccinations. I feel fortunate, and I feel guilty for my privilege. Okay, so the next time you're on the struggle bus, it might sound a little bit like this. Yep, I'm here again, and I wish I wasn't, and I don't know what to do, and yes, and. So you allow it all in. And when you do that, be assured that that is an act of love. Allowing yourself to do that is self-compassion work. Okay. Spotlight on values. All right, so sometimes, well, let me start with this. Can you think of a theme for what you tend to be hard on yourself about? Okay. You can think of that in your head. If you want to share that in the chat, I welcome you to do that. Oftentimes, the theme or the content of what we're hard on ourselves about shines the light on what we really care about or what we value. You can start to think about this if you have a theme, think about that as a signpost for what you really care about. Because when we care about a quality, it leads us to feeling integrity, so that it makes sense that when our experiences fall short of living in our values, we get ruffled. So I'm going to tell you hopefully a brief story because I'm watching the time, but this is a messy truth. A couple years ago, I was in this office, my professional office, and I was by myself, and I was getting some files out of a filing cabinet and multitasking and getting stuff done. And I slammed my finger in the filing cabinet. I shut my finger in the filing cabinet. And what came out of my mouth was a X-rated version of "You are a blanking idiot." Okay. I said it loud and mean. And the special irony to the situation is truly I had just given a talk on self-compassion the week before. So because of the intensity of what I said, it shocked me, and I actually sat down, and I had this, all fresh in my head. So I sat down and I did a version of the rain and a self-compassion break to try to calm down and to figure out where that came from. So in my case, fortunately, I do not have people who talk to me like that when I was a child. So I had to do a little deeper digging to figure out where would that come from. So in my case, it was a conflict of values, or it shone the light on a value that I have. And that value, like so many Americans, is productivity, efficiency, competency. But it was also in conflict with another value that I have, which is caring for the self. So I bring this up so that you can spend some time thinking about the theme of what you're hard on yourself for, because it might be time to kind of reevaluate. So here's some questions to ask yourself about values. Has your value become too constrictive? For example, has an appreciation for excellence become somewhat of like an inflexible perfectionism? Or does a value that you once held still hold top spot in your life? Does it continue to serve you well? And do you give other people a pass, but hold yourself to a higher standard when it comes to that value? So when we consider our values, it offers up another opportunity to re-examine what we're holding on so tightly to. Okay, we're moving on. This is one of my favorites, actually, the Hallmark moment. Okay, so that beautiful, like very catchy, when you care enough to send the very best Hallmark statement. So what I want you to do is imagine that you have a friend that's struggling with a complicated problem. What many of us do is we want to let them know that we're thinking of them. And so we might go buy them a card at Hallmark and, let the words speak for themselves, or we might write some things in ourselves. So I put up on the slide kind of the general outline of what you would see in a Hallmark card. It goes something like, dear friend, I'm thinking of you. I see you. I'm sorry that this problem is happening. I see your struggle. I wish it wasn't true. I wish I could do more for you. I can't solve it. And I support you. I care deeply for you. And I'm here. Those are beautiful sentiments. So now I'd like for you to imagine if you applied that Hallmark message to yourself when you face adversity. This message doesn't flee or fight reality. It stays with you. Okay. It doesn't even pretend to solve the problem. Okay. What it does is it tend and befriend. So I have a homework assignment for all of you. And also, it supports local business. But I'd like for you to go to Hallmark or Tuttle's, or if you have a different place that you like to go to, and spend like some time, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, looking through the coping section or another encouragement section of Hallmark, and see if you can find a card that really speaks to you. And then buy that card for yourself. You can add words to it if you want, but then I'd like for you to place it in your home or in your car or someplace where you feel like, yep, I need to be reminded of this. Oh, I brought an example of one. I don't know if you can see that. It's very simple. It says, it's okay not to be okay. And then in the inside, it says, but know that you are supported by love and support. Who wouldn't want to get that? Okay. Who loves you, baby? This is Love Echo. So sometimes if we're having trouble finding compassionate words for ourselves, we can help ourselves by thinking about people who loved us well or love us well. My maternal grandmother used to say to me, bless your heart, sweetie. So, at the beginning of the presentation, I asked you to think about a teacher or someone, a mentor, and they may have had like a nickname for you or some kind of term of endearment that they used for you. So use it. Use those terms of endearment towards yourself, because not only does it sounds and feels good, it will help you recall the love of somebody else, the care of somebody else towards yourself. And so if you think about, my example of when I said, what I said, if instead of saying, you're so, blanking, what, if I said instead, oh man, bless your heart, sweetie, right? My grandma would be right there with me. Okay, self-compassion break. So self-compassion in the resources. I know we're getting close to the end of the time, so I'll start, directing you to the resources. Christy Neff has a website, and on her website there are all of these self-compassion practices to research and see videos on. So self-compassion break refers to really just when you again are on that struggle bus, pausing, recognizing it as a moment of suffering, knowing that suffering is a part of life, and then wishing yourself some kind of kindness in that moment. You can find more on that resource link. So I want to conclude tonight in doing a very short loving kindness meditation. And I know that Katie McIntyre did a mindfulness presentation a couple of weeks ago. So you can find this on her PowerPoint slide as well. I just want to say a couple words about the full loving kindness meditation, which is very powerful. But we're not going to do the full one tonight. But when you do the full loving kindness meditation, there's 5 categories of people that you think of. They include yourself, someone that you love, someone that you have mild conflict with, a neutral person, like someone that you don't know very well, but that you can tell could use like an energetic dose of compassion, and then all living things. Then you take statements, and you can use other people's statements, or you can spend time thinking about what you really would want to wish for other people very specifically, okay? And when you do a full loving kindness meditation, you start with closing your eyes and doing some breath work, and then you one by one call up those category of people, develop the image of the person as if they're standing in front of you, and then go through those mantras. Slowly go through the mantras and imagine that that person is receiving that love and how they might be transformed. It is a very powerful practice, and it is the one that I spoke of earlier that activates the positive emotions in that left prefrontal cortex and dampens down the negative emotions in the right prefrontal cortex. So I'm inviting you now to end this session. I will stick around for questions, though. I just want you to know, but I want to respect your time. We're just going to do a brief loving kindness meditation with thinking about all living things. So I invite you to join me, and I'm going to put my hand over my heart and just breathe in a couple of times. And now I invite you to form in your mind the image of something that represents all living things, all living beings. color that in as if you are looking at it. And then as you hold that in your imagination, we are going to send forth the following well wishes. May all beings be safe and healthy. May all beings be healed and whole. May all beings be protected from harm and free from fear. May all beings be loved and love others. And may all beings know peace within ourselves and between others. And then just imagine how the world might be transformed when all living beings receive that energy. And imagine how you are transformed when you speak to yourself in that way. So with that, I wish you all heightened awareness and a strengthened capacity to be your own benevolent companion. And I hope that these are beginning practices, and remember, they have to do with words. They start with the pause. They start with the pause when we're struggling. So I hope that these practices build new ways of relating to yourself. And I hope that you feel or begin to feel what is aptly described as embodied peace and presence. So I thank you all for your attention and for your sweetness earlier, and for any effort that you make towards being in and building more compassionate relationship. So I'll stick around for questions if anybody has them. And I thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sheila.
You're welcome.
So feel free to put any questions you have in the message box or the Q&A. Some comments. So thank you so much. Thank you for stating that self-compassion is not being selfish. It's hard for me to put time into myself. So thank you for this great presentation.
You're welcome.
This isn't really a question, but I find the learning that's been going on about the flexibility of our brains and the ability to teach them to do things differently or teach them to do new things really exciting. So I think this works with that too. Another thank you for your time to teach others how they can take care of themselves without feeling guilty about it. Lots of thank yous.
You're all very welcome.
Rolling in. Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming to the presentation tonight.
Yeah.
It's nice to have an audience to be speaking to, and we had a good turnout tonight, so that's wonderful.
It's great. Yes.
And thank you for your presentation, such good words and messages for all of us to hear, and it's okay to not be okay. I've told myself that a lot in the last year because, you know, I never experienced a pandemic before. I had no idea how it was going to impact me, and it wasn't good. But I find I'm not alone. So.
Right. What a great thing just to remind yourself. It's okay not to be okay, and we're not alone because, you know, we're in voluminous company with people who are struggling with the many different effects of a pandemic and just the year 2020 and all that brought, and will continue to. So, you know, the more we can be honest, listened to something today that reminded me, like, self-reflection is social justice. Self-reflection is part of what moves the dial to also change humanity. And the more that we can be honest, with ourselves, that is truly an act of love for ourselves, but it's also an act of love for other people, because it gives other people permission to do the same.
That's a pretty profound concept.
Mm-hmm.
Another comment, I took notes and shed a few tears because it was so awesome.
Oh, happy tears, I hope. Happy tears of, transformation, the possibility. The brain is an amazing thing. Like, and really, we're going to find out more and more and more. There's it's the new frontier, and we're going to keep finding out how to work with this, amazing powerhouse that we have.
And yes, they were happy tears, she said.
Okay. Good. Excellent. Thank you again, Amy. I mean, I'm not sure whose idea it was, through at Fort Healthcare or the, the librarians, but as a provider, I'm so thrilled and happy to see when psychological topics, mindfulness is offered to the public. I'm always happy to present, and I like doing it. So it just makes me happy to see that these types of things are becoming more mainstream and supported and available to people.
Right. Yeah.
So thank you and maybe it was you. So thank you, for being part of it.
Not initially. This was, I think, Fort Healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
I think they might have approached Minetta, and they worked with her and put together this whole plan for, oh my gosh, just a myriad of different activities and information and events. And the mindfulness challenge has really been, I think, an extraordinary thing that our library and the other libraries in Jefferson County, who then got on board with it too, have been able to offer to the residents in Jefferson County. So it was a great opportunity. Yeah, so we were really glad that we were able to do this as well, because it's a good reminder for all of us. I always learn at the programs when I present. Comment just came in that this would be great for high schoolers to hear this year too. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
One thing that just came to me that we can do is if we have children in our homes, is speak your process out loud. So when you're working on your self-compassion practice, it is a very powerful thing to catch yourself when you're frustrated, and then just to show your children that what you're doing is you're pausing and you're speaking out loud words of truthful kindness to yourself, because that is what they are going to remember. They will watch, they'll watch what you do more than, a different moment where you might tell them, something that might, if there's an inconsistency between what you say and what you do, they're going to really pay attention. Kids are very observant. So the more that you can model that self-compassion practice out loud and you start to get comfortable with it, it'll make a difference to your kids, and it gives them permission to also then do the same and learn that practice themselves in your home.
Wonderful. Well, I think if there are no more questions, we will let Sheila get back to her life. And once again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Sheila. Really appreciate your time and your expertise.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Stay warm, stay safe.
Yep. And you can come to the library starting next week. So
great. Okay.
Yep.
Wonderful.
All right. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.